Blessed are you, my brother.
Well, the title of the album is Church Under Fire. That was originally not going to be the title of the album, but it actually changed over a period of time, sort of evolved. And toward the end of the recording, we were sitting back one day and listening to this particular track on the album. It isn't just the title of the album, but the track Church Under Fire. And it just hit us that really this is the theme of the whole album. The whole theme is dedicated to persecution for Christ's sake in over 55 countries worldwide. That's been happening for a long, long time. So this album is dedicated to the persecuted Christians worldwide, and Church Under Fire just seems a very, very appropriate title for the album. In the first year of my conversion, I've been following Christ for about 20 years now, but I remember one day very clearly an older gentleman coming to our church. He was a guest speaker. He was a representative of Voice of the Martyrs. This is the organisation that I've since been affiliated with in a variety of ways. And it was the first time that I'd actually heard about the message of the persecuted. I think that I had persecution locked into some sort of archaic vault. I thought it was something that happened to people thousands of years ago. I didn't realise that Christians at that time, his statistics that day actually at the church were at least 500 a day were being martyred for their faith. And this is not for political purposes. I want to be sure that you will understand that this is for spiritual purposes. These are people who have named the name of Jesus, and for that they are actually imprisoned, they are tortured, and in a lot of cases put to death. So that was the first time I'd ever really heard about the message of the persecuted, and my reaction to that was one that really surprised me. It was a very intense, a very passionate response. And in fact, I remember that day running out of the church, standing out on the back steps of the church and sobbing, absolutely sobbing with the stories of martyrdom and the suffering that I'd heard about. And immediately the question came to me, and I believe it was God's question to me, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with the gifts that I've given you to not only let the world know that this is happening, but how are you going to use the specific gifts and talents and abilities that I've given you to let them know that you care and that I care about them, that I know they're suffering and I know why they're suffering. So it's a twofold ministry for me, and I'm very, very grateful to have become affiliated with VOM. They reside actually in Sydney, by the way, up in the Blue Mountains. Look, I've got a great bunch of people around me, and I have had for many years. And one of the wonderful things about the industry and about befriending people and knowing them at a personal level is that when you're doing something as personal and as meaningful as this particular album, it's just wonderful to be able to call on your friends, to call on the people that are not only good at what they do, they're professional, but these are people you know, these are people you love. And I can honestly say I've been really blessed. So the group of musos that I had around me, people like Adrian Hannon, my producer, I'll talk a little bit about him a little further down the track, his wife Barbara Hannon. We had Norman Felvo, original keyboard player for Chocolate Starfish, who's been a very good friend of mine since I was about 20. And my husband Mike Kelly, who's here today. And as well as that, I had a wonderful friend that I've known since my early 20s actually. Her name is Alison McDonald, and she's known around the trap. She does a lot of work here and overseas. Came to me many years ago as a student, in fact, and we became friends. And I pulled her into her first session all those years ago with some of my original material, and our friendship has continued. But perhaps, you know, one of the most wonderful, and Steve Romy, I must remember Steve Romy. He will kill me if I don't mention Steve. Steve, you're getting a mention. Now, Steve Romy is a wonderful Australian songwriter. He's written for artists like John Farnham and so forth, recorded several albums. My husband Mike and I have basically contributed vocally just to about every album that he's actually released in the last decade or so, and that's been wonderful. We had him there. So the core group of singers are made up of 8 people, including myself, and it really makes for a wonderful blend. But one of the most special things, I have to say, was having my own daughter, Leah Hannah, on this album. Leah, as she likes to be known, is a wonderful flautist. She's a beautiful singer. She was in her own little band quite a few years ago, actually, 2 or 3 years ago. She had her own little band going and was writing a lot of the melodic lines for flute and for vocals. And since then, of course, she's married with a little boy, but continues to pursue her music. And she was just wonderful. What a blessing to have your own daughter singing and playing on the album. And you'll hear Lay's flute playing. It's actually featured in the second track of the album called John My Beloved. Adrian Hannon, extraordinaire, that's all I can say, a man with a multiplicity of abilities and talents. I think particularly here in Melbourne, where I live, Adrian's known to so many different musos and so many different places. He's done so much. Adrian Hannon is a multi-talented musician. He's not just an engineer or producer, but somebody who can play at least 5 instruments. He's a songwriter. He has an extraordinary ability to construct a song. So when I take a song to Adrian, I'm very, very confident that we're not only going to record a song, we're actually going to tell a story. And he does that through the music, as well as looking at the lyrics, marrying the right instrumentation to the song. So we look at the song together and we can say, well, what does this song need? What is it actually saying to us? What are we hearing it to be saying to us? And that's been the most wonderful thing, is working with somebody who's not just an engineer, not just a producer, but someone who's a musician and a songwriter. And he understands it from the inside, if you understand what I mean. And Adrian's also a really wonderful friend. I honestly bless the day that guy came into my life. And I know I wouldn't be sitting here today with 2 albums, in fact. This is my 2nd album. Out of Egypt was my 1st album, which was also produced by Adrian Hannon around the year 2000. So it's been an absolute privilege knowing him and working with him. And I'm really comfortable with Adrian. I think that's the other thing. When you're writing stuff that's as personal as this, you're really putting your insides on the line, so to speak. Your guts on the line, really, in a lot of ways. And I'm very comfortable doing that with Adrian Hannon. Yeah, the most difficult song to write. It's interesting. I often feel that songs write me rather than the other way around. And I think anybody that's actually a songwriter will maybe have had this sort of experience, or this feeling that sometimes an idea will just float into your head or into your heart, and before you know it, you've got an entire song sitting there, both melody and lyric. That happened to me with the song Hidden in Jesus. And Hidden in Jesus is actually the first track of the album. It is an 8.5 minute long song, so before everybody kind of takes a breath, it's a song that tells an amazing story of 5 different people, starting with the Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, his sufferings, and then it moves into the modern day sufferings of different individuals that I've actually had the absolute privilege of reading about and of knowing about their suffering. It depicts the suffering of 4 or 5 other Christian people in the modern day and takes you on a journey. And it puts you in their shoes because it's written in first person. So it's I am the daughter, I am the mother. And so it really puts you in the shoes of the one who is suffering for their faith. And that's really what I'm wanting to do, is to take people on a journey. I don't want them just to hear about the message of the persecuted. I want them to feel that message. And that's what that song does. I have always had a love for Gregorian chant. And I've loved it since I was a little kid. I love it. I love the fact that it's very bare. As far as musical instrumentation goes, it's often just the human voice. It's set in environment, a physical environment that really, gives full sway to that the reverb of the voices and just the natural acoustics of a human voice. So it was always my dream to put together a Gregorian chant, and this particular piece on the album, which is called Be at Peace, is a prayer that was written by Francis of Assisi. And it's a prayer that's less known. Most people associate Francis of Assisi with let me be an instrument of thy peace, but this is called Be at Peace. And when I actually read these words, I was in a really dark place one day visiting a friend, and I found this prayer on her fridge. I was so overwhelmed by that prayer, it became my prayer instantly. I took it home, sat at the piano, and a few hours later, Be at Peace was birthed, and I realised as I was writing it that it was a Gregorian chant, and I wanted to actually have a go at something of that style myself. So this one was one of the most unique pieces on the album, and it really evolved. As we were actually recording it, it sort of took on a life of its own. One of the most difficult things about recording that particular piece was that I had to strip all the vibrato out of my voice, which is actually not natural to me at all. Anybody who knows my voice, it's a big voice. There's a lot of warble in it, as Adrian Hannon likes to say to me, and we need to get rid of all of that. So having to strip the voice right back to just this straight sound all the way through was really challenging for me. And to sing without the usual emotion that would attend the way I would actually approach a lyric, that was also a real challenge. But the results are just fantastic. I'm very, very happy with that. Yes, there was a song, it's a psalm in fact, it's Psalm 63 verse 1. O God, you are my God, earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you, my body longs for you, in a dry and weary land where there is no water. Just that verse, and it's a musical meditation. And when I first wrote that, it sounded more like just a piano and vocal piece. But what in fact has happened is that Adrian, because he's so brilliant, he's been able to actually create a soundscape behind that really puts the listener in the desert. So when you're actually listening to this piece, you really feel that you yourself have actually gone to some incredibly, almost God-forsaken place where it is just you and the one who gave you life. And I was also privileged, by the way, with that particular song, which is very short. So you've got Hidden in Jesus, 8.5 minutes. This one's actually less than 3 minutes long. I had a very, very lovely old friend of mine that I've known since I was 15, a lovely Jewish man who was my first employer when I was a kid. And he's a cellist, and he's nearly 80 now, Leon Siegel. And he came and he lent his wonderful playing skills to that. And so I have a lovely little cello solo in the middle of it, but it sounds so desolate. You just feel so alone when you listen to it. But the one thing that keeps coming back to you is that the psalmist is saying, while everything else is gone, while everyone else has abandoned me, God is still here. And he's crying out to his God. And I think there are a lot of people who really relate to that particular piece. So that really, when I listen back at it now and I compare it with what I wrote, how it sounded when I first took it into the studio, a complete departure from what I had imagined. This album's a very eclectic album, not unlike Out of Egypt, my first album. I like to actually take people on a musical journey. So it's really important for me to look at each song and say, what kind of treatment does that song actually need? And just to give you an example, the first track on Church Under Fire is a song called Hidden in Jesus, which I've spoken about, and this has a distinct Middle Eastern flavour. Then you have Be at Peace, which is a Gregorian chant. Then you have something like Psalm 63 verse 1, which is actually a soundscape. You have other songs on the album like John My Beloved that are just beautiful, just guitar and voice with a bit of flute and some lovely 3/4 part harmonies in the background. So it just takes you on this journey. You're not stuck with one style of music all the way through the album. It really is quite an eclectic album. But that seems to be indicative of my style. I tend to treat each song individually, even if the album is a thematic album. The official launch for Church Under Fire will take place in mid-November here in Melbourne. Well, you know, you always say this is going to be the last one, and I've often been quoted as saying, well, God, and I've said this to the Lord many times, Lord, if this was to be the last album that I ever record, and this is only the second one that I've done a heap of stuff for other people, but it took me a long time to really record my own stuff. If this is to be the last album, I would be very happy going out on this, because this whole album encapsulates what my life is about. My life is about Christ. I don't own my life, God owns me. And so if I were to go out on this one, I would think myself very blessed indeed. However, having said that, if God leaves me here for the next 20, 30, 40 years, or however long that is, I know without a doubt that because I'm a person that gets very passionate and very inspired by things, I know that I'll definitely continue to write. And hopefully by His grace, I'll be able to actually record another album. In fact, my husband Mike Kelly and I, we do have a collaboration album there. We've written, all the music's been written, it's just sitting there, and while we were recording Church Under Fire, we were already sitting in a cafe one night having dinner, discussing and punching into our iPhones the 14 tracks for the next album. So there you have it. But in the next few weeks, something else that has really been a passion of mine for many years is the need of the unborn child in the womb, the protection of the unborn child in the womb. And recently I was given the opportunity to actually write a piece of music. I have written that song. It was 2 weeks ago that I wrote it. It's called Ode to the Unborn, and it's written from the perspective of the baby in the mother's womb. And this child is talking to his or her mother and is essentially pleading for its own life. It's advocating for itself from the womb. And so I've actually written this song. I'm in the studio tomorrow with Adrian to actually finish it off, get it all ready, and I'll be performing that on the 12th of October at the Sofitel here in Melbourne, where Lord Nicholas Windsor will actually also be the special guest speaker from Rome. That's taken on a life of its own. I'll also be performing the following day on the 13th at the rally at the front of Parliament House, where I'll be performing Amazing Grace. So parallel with the work for the persecuted is also work for the unborn child. For more information on purchasing the album, on purchasing Church Under Fire, you can also purchase Out of Egypt. You can go to my website, which is kayeharrison.com. You'll find me on Facebook under the same name, and you'll be able to actually make your purchase there. I think we're on iTunes, aren't we?
CD Baby.
CD Baby, iTunes, it's all there. So, the Voice of the Martyrs is an underground organisation that started in 1967. Here you'll see, just on their own little newsletter here, serving the persecuted church since 1967. And the full proceeds from this album will go to supporting the work of Voice of the Martyrs, known as VOM. And aside from that, we have a ministry, a frontline ministry to Pakistan, which started about 6.5 years ago, and we'll be actually sending some funds over there to support the work of Christ in Pakistan, more specifically in the brick kiln places of Pakistan. And that involves, of course, the distribution of Bibles, etc., and helping people with their medical expenses, food, whatever their needs are. So we're here to support them. In closing, I just want to give you an idea of what it is like for somebody who's actually suffering persecution for Christ's sake. These are the words of a brother in Christ who was in prison for 6 years in Pakistan. I am thankful that you are concerned about me. I am a humble servant of God who is now in jail. I am sick with various diseases and have not been allowed any medicines. My condition is getting worse all the time. Being a prisoner charged with blasphemy, I have been kept alone in a darkened cell where there is no light, no toilet, and no fan to cool me from the heat. I have to tell other prisoners that I am here for theft, as I would be beaten for being a Christian. So I have been tortured many times. Pakistan.
Can you hear the voices of the martyrs? Can you see their tortured faces in your mind's eye? Oh, I can hear the cries of our Savior as they die. Can you hear the voices of the martyrs in your mind?